we interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
Hey, Brian. Appreciate you bringing me on today. I know one of the things you want to talk about is this book, Always Faithful. And I think it plays well into your usual topics just because it plays into source operations, insurgency, organizations working against one another, and people operating under pressure. I mean, in 2021, I thought I was completely done with that kind of work. And it's, as we've talked about in the past, it's kind of how it can suck you back in. I started driving around America in an RV on July 5th of 2021, and I was real studiously avoiding Afghanistan or any news from it. And then I started seeing a little bit, when I would wake up, it was just my daughter and I in this RV. And I remember that there was, hey, the Taliban has taken Lashkar-Gah down in Helmand province. And I was like, yeah, whatever. I mean, it's like sport, they take Lashkar-Gah, and then the Afghan commandos would go back in and kick them out. And I kind of ignored that until I saw they had taken some districts up in the north part of the country. And then I got home around August 5th, I think, of 2021. And by the 15th, they were at the gates of Kabul. And that led to something that wasn't related to this book, but that got me started, which was I was just laying in my bed here, and I've been retired all of 45 days, I think. And this Marine Lance Corporal, who's a reservist, but a prior Afghan interpreter who had moved to Houston, neat guy, private investigator now, MMA champ. I mean, he's a tough guy. But he had joined the Marines, and he reached out to me and was like, can you help me get my parents out? My dad is with the Special Mission Wing, which is their special ops aviation. My brother's an interpreter there. My mom and my little brother are in Kabul, and I'm afraid they're all going to die. And I was like, dude, I don't know. I'll do what I can. And as I say, I just retired. I'm a writer now. And I was on my first writing gig out in Western Carolina, which is an area I know and the world was coming to an end with, we had a massive hurricane that was pushing crazy bands out. So the Tuckasegee was overflowing. The Nalachukki, and houses were sliding off the mountains. And I'm on a mountaintop in a house with no communication. Except for the barest of internet. And I'm trying to coordinate the evacuation of this guy's family in Kabul via him in Houston, playing telephone all the way around the world. And we did it. And that was the same night that I reached out to this guy, Tom Schumann, and said, hey, man, I think I got a way to get your boy out. At which point he said, I think we got it under control, actually. But we stayed in touch. And so when it was all over, I had retired to write, and Tom was still an active duty Marine. So I hooked up with him and Zach and ended up writing that book for him.
Yeah. I always look at the parallels between overseas work, source work, and in the U.S. with gangs, with informants, interpreters. And one of the things that I've had to explain to people is like, when law enforcement uses, oftentimes what we would call is like Spanish speaking officers, right? Like this shortened kind of version of an officer's ability to translate. And oftentimes you call them to the scene and you're like, hey, can you do me a favor? Can you translate? And what will happen is the officer will then be speaking, say, Spanish to a citizen. And then now they're just speaking back and forth. And the other officer's like, all right, well, what'd they say? And then they kind of, go back and forth. And my thing, like when we were in investigations and we would need interpreters, I would always switch it up and say, listen, the officer is going to be translating for you. They need to be sitting behind the suspect or the person you're interviewing. And you need to, when you speak, that officer needs to be interpreting your inflection, and your connotation and what you're saying, and you keep eye contact with the person that you're interviewing. You don't allow the translator to take over in that sense. And it was like the idea of trying to make that connection. And so when I'm reading about operations overseas, when I'm learning about interpreters and the risk that they took, I didn't have that because these officers are they just speak a different, second language. I didn't have to necessarily deal with that. I only had to overcome a language barrier. Overseas, it's a completely different threat. It's the threat of, at some point, the enemy who realizes an interpreter is working with Americans could be executed. And I think that for Americans, I know sometimes people go, yeah, it sounds like it's dangerous, but like I do wonder if there are Americans who would be willing to do that, to put their life on the line, their families' lives on the line, to interpret and translate for people, in that sort of environment. I know that's kind of rambling, but you know what I'm saying? It's like this idea
Yeah, no, I
of
mean,
life or death.
I think some of it, obviously there's desperation at play and a paycheck. And then you have people who genuinely wanted a better Iraq, a better Afghanistan. They wanted what we were trying to sell. And ultimately, obviously, didn't sell as effectively as the Taliban sold what they were selling. But, it's interesting. Just talking about parallels and distinctions. I've spent a lot of time around source operations, talked about source operations, very familiar with both concepts and practice of source operations. However, I never lose sight of the fact that, an average mid to large size city police officer is doing a lot more practical source operation work than I would ever do, or ever would understand. And I got a good buddy of mine who's a retired fellow Raider, and before that he worked in the federal prison system. Before that, he worked as a border patrol guy, cutting sign down on the southern border for years before that, and ultimately decided, and it was an air marshal, and then decided to go in the Marine Corps full time. And he talks about it all the time because he's from New York and got a bunch of buddies from that area. It is huge, and the why they would do it and the danger involved is nuts. I think for me, the Afghanistan danger was generalized and constant and real, but it was much more practical for me in in Iraq, where I had, I think, 3 different interpreters over one deployment, and one of them got a Marine Corps tattoo and went home to Baghdad, and we never saw him again. And I pretty much assumed that he had marked himself for death. We had one who I thought was a Marine because he had learned English from the Marines of 1st Marine Division. And he was very, very facile with the use of the F-bomb.
Yeah.
I mean, it's literally the first time I met this kid, he was sitting there wearing like a Marine uniform without markings, and I didn't know why he was in our spaces, much less why he was on our one computer. But he was like, "What's up, bro?" And I was like, I don't know whether to light this Marine up. I don't know who he is. I don't know what's happening right now. And then later, one of the Marines was like, "Yeah, that's our new Terp, sir." Oh, okay. But one of my sister platoon's Terps went home on leave, or excuse me, I guess he lived out in the town, and he was a tough guy. He was a true believer. He was all in on the mission, and he got dumped in a trash bag in pieces on the gate at the fob. Literally bag. And it's an incredibly dangerous job. Zach, who this story's about, Zainul Azaki, who's thankfully here in America now. He faced death threats aside from combat. He was engaged in combat with Marines all the time. And of course, those guys never got to go home because they were home. So I never lost sight of that.
Yeah, it's the parallels are similar in that sense of working sources. So flipping actual gang members into informants. And at times, because they want out of that lifestyle and that gang, so they cooperate. Sometimes they cooperate for money, and sometimes they cooperate for some type of reduction in charges and that sort of thing. But at the base of it, they're still operating day to day inside of a gang, providing information to us in law enforcement. And the idea was always, trust, in the sense they have to be able to trust that we can handle them and that we know exactly what we're doing, kind of thing. Not, I don't know, like to come across as either lazy or incompetent or that we didn't care. And that was kind of one of those hiccups I saw sometimes with officers and detectives who did not fully understand how to develop sources. And they looked at it as if this person, they would look at them in disgust, or, they would just kind of their body language would tell the gang member, hey, I hate your guts, but I want you to put your life on the line in order to provide information or buy a gun or whatever. And my experience was always to just build human rapport. And if they wanted to cooperate, that's perfect. If they did not, I never wanted to pressure anybody. But the idea that a person is operating in their home, like you were saying, they're in their home area, they never get that downtime. They never get to just decompress or get in a secured area or know that, hey, in 6 months or a year, I'll be rotating back to, an entire continent away, over the ocean. It's no, this could be the rest of my life. And I got to trust that America is in it for the long haul. I mean, I think, right? Like, wasn't that, like you said, you had guys that were true believers, but did you have to kind of not sell them on it, but I don't know, explain to them that, yeah, America is here for the good fight?
I mean, you got to demonstrate the faith. I mean, certainly there's the special immigrant visa, which we talk a lot about in Always Faithful. And that was the impetus for a lot of these guys. If you'd done 12 months of service to the U.S. government, documented, then you were eligible to apply for a special immigrant visa. Now, a lot of that's been put on hold in the last 30 days. And a lot of people who have been sitting and waiting now for 4 years, hoping to get out of, a horrific condition that maybe 0.05% of America can understand, either because they went there and saw it or because they live really hard here.
Yeah.
But the daily life of somebody in Afghanistan or Iraq even was something I couldn't always grasp, even when I was looking at it.
Yeah.
And so I think that impetus for coming to America was a huge thing driving people. Money was a thing driving people, and for a lot of them, it was a patriotism. Zach didn't want to move to America. He didn't want to leave his whole family. I mean, this guy one day made a phone call to his dad, and he's like, "This is the last time I'm ever going to see you." They didn't want to get up and leave. This is where he's from. He's like, and he's resettled in America. He's got asylum. It's great. But he's like, I don't want to be a Texan. I wanted to be an Afghan. That's where I'm from.
Yeah.
As I told you, before we started, I may die here, but my ashes are going to Georgia. I'm a Georgian. It's just where my body belongs. And I can't imagine, people that think these folks just randomly uprooted their entire lives in the middle of the night, took one bag apiece if they could handle that, and went to Kabul International Airport to try and get on an airplane or stow themselves in the wheel well or climb up the wing while it's rolling down the runway. It's something that, frankly, it drives me a little crazy, because I think the average American has such a tangential at best connection with the rest of the world and what it's like. And the things we cry about here and the things we complain about here are things that people would crawl all over each other to get to in other countries.
Yeah. I think you and I both enjoy reading a little bit about history, and it is sickening to see the cycles occur. And so growing up, there was footage of, the fall of Saigon and, Vietnamese people, trying to climb on Hueys as they're flying out of Saigon. And I remember at a very young age, like just that sickening feeling. My dad had served in the Army during Vietnam, but didn't actually go into war.
My dad was the same way in the Marines, served, but wasn't there.
Yeah, my dad, actually, a side note, had volunteered to go. He was brand new in the Army and was combat engineer. And the way he used to tell it was like, eventually he could tell, he's like, Captain came to me and told me and my buddy, hey, you're not going to be staying in this unit. You're not going to be going to Vietnam. And he's like, next thing I know, I'm getting on a bus with like painted windows. Like you couldn't see out of these windows. He's like, we went to go get trained up on handheld nuclear devices, atomic demolitions. So that was, his time in, but we would talk about the military a lot. So early on, when I saw those images and stuff, I mean, it was horrible. And it felt the exact same way as an adult and seeing footage coming out of Kabul and just going, as a kid, I was always told, hey, history repeats itself. And I'm like, yeah, but we're always going to learn from that. But I don't understand that. And maybe I'm wrong, but it felt very reminiscent of that.
No, I agree with you. I felt the same way watching it, and I was commenting to my wife last night, how things impact you. I remember I was 4 years old in 1976, when the Vietnamese rolled into Phnom Penh, and I remember, and I was already a kid who just gravitated towards war stories, even at 4 years old. And I remember watching those tanks. I didn't understand what I was seeing, but within a couple more years, I did. And I studied Vietnam like it was my job, for 20 or 25 years. And I've shifted on to other things now, but I still go back to it from time to time. But that completely uh, drove what my career ended up being and how my career went within that career. Because I just that war got my attention, and that style of warfare. And yeah, tremendous analogies between Kabul and Saigon in 1975.
Yeah. Do you think that drawing those parallels in which sources were being used, and at a young age, same thing, like I would read a lot of the books that were written about Vietnam units, and it was so, like, a lot of it was just so limited and going in depth until, probably late 80s, early 90s. But this whole idea of guerrilla warfare, working sources, trying to get Montagnards and fighting tribes and stuff in there, and on the surface, it all begins to collapse again. And it's this idea of, I never felt like reading that I had a full grasp at a young age of what was going on that far in depth, and that I would say that far advanced too. I can remember the stereotypes of adults kind of saying, well, we, quote unquote, America lost Vietnam and blah blah blah. And just my thing was always, when I would read about, I always wanted to know more, and I wanted to fully understand that aspect of it, of what was going on behind the scenes, sources that were being worked, and then in the end, why did it happen that way? Why was it, this fall of Saigon kind of thing? And at a young age, I read about it, got fascinated by it, and eventually I joined the Army, just like you had joined the Marine Corps. But I always wanted to be in the Army. I never ever wanted to be in any other branch, which is very weird. Was it the same for you though? Like,
Yeah, I mean, my dad was a Marine. My grandfather was an enlisted Marine in World War II, and I come from a family. Well, obviously different families, but my dad's side of the family, I think he's the first college graduate.
Okay.
On my mom's side of the family, her dad, who died young, but he was an appellate court judge, who fought as an enlisted Marine in World War II. He was buddies with President Kennedy, President Johnson. I'm looking right now at a pheasant on my wall that my grandfather shot from the open back of LBJ's convertible while they were driving across his ranch. And his dad was a federal appeals court judge. His uncle was a senator for 39 years. His grandfather was the Chief Justice of the Georgia Supreme Court. So I come from this law and order side on one side, but what they did serve, and they were Marines, and between my dad and my granddad, and that influenced me. And then I probably have 4 or 5 other Marines. I've got a lot of Army. As far as in my family, the real live genuine heroes were both Army guys, who were West Point classmates. Both ended up company commanders at Pork Chop Hill together. And if you ever watch that movie, Gregory Peck plays my cousin Walter, and Rip Torn plays my cousin Buddy. Yeah, so I mean, they were the real deal, and they were Army guys. But my dad was a Marine, right? So in my head, like when I played with the little green Army men, there was the one with the binos and the 45. that was my dad in my head, and that's who I want to be. I want to be the guy with the binos and the 45.
Oh, dude. Yeah, it was funny. My dad, like when I was growing up, my dad would talk about the Army, but only in just general terms. He would just say, he would tell me funny stories about basic training, or maybe like learning how to blow stuff up, and then leave it very generic. And so I didn't know until sometime, probably like late middle school, early high school, he just pulls out a briefcase, pops it open, and he's like, "Hey, check this out." and then starts telling me about all the stuff that back then had been classified up to a certain time frame, and then he could actually talk about it. And now, through the internet sources and stuff, you can actually pull up his unit and another unit and like their patches. They had these pocket patches and stuff that were only in existence for a few years. But either way, like you're saying, like playing with like little army men and stuff, I just always thought that was the way to go. Like, man, the army thing was just like so cool. Even though my grandfather and my uncle were Navy. My grandfather's career Navy, almost 30 years, salvage diver, stuff like that. Just like a hardcore dude, nicest guy in the world to us as like grandkids growing up.
Yeah.
And all I knew is he was funny, and that like I never would want to like fight him or see somebody, cross this path. But learned later as an adult that like he was pretty hardcore. Like he did not believe in like written punishments for his sailors or doing anything that would take money out of their pockets or cause them to never be able to get promoted. But he would do is take them into like these whatever work areas, boiler room areas, whatever on these ships, and I mean beat them. Like they would just straight up, and he would tell them, now it's over with. Don't do that again. You're going to get somebody hurt or whatever. And my uncle told me a story as an adult. He's like, man, because my uncle had gone in the Navy as well. And he's like, I met, one of your grandfather's sailors. And he said, yeah, your father, my uncle's telling stories like your father beat me, like beat me bad. I made some really bad mistakes. He's like, but nobody ever knew anything different.
Right.
And that guy was able to continue his career in the Navy. And to me, I was just like, it's a different era, but man, I always was just drawn to that. I just always thought that was like the right path. And I owe a lot to the Army. I loved it. I did 4 years and did the GI Bill thing. They helped pay for college. UPS helped pay for my college. So I graduated debt free. Like, I'm cruising through life. And sadly, other people are accruing like $50,000 in debt for college. And
I think you have an amazing experience. Like I don't. Sometimes I wonder how I ended up where I did. Sometimes it seems like a really clear trajectory, but like my parents were divorced, and I grew up in Athens, Georgia, in the '80s, which was a great music town. A great place to grow up for that sort of thing. And I was a skateboard riding music kid. I didn't play any sports. I didn't. I had hair down over one eye, and this was
that's
shaved.
The way it should be.
Yeah, right. So I was just like sort of Mr. Anti-authoritarian, also an Eagle Scout. And my scoutmaster was a special forces guy. So that influenced me for sure. But ultimately, I was a mama's boy growing up in the suburbs of Athens, Georgia. And the Marine Corps gave me an opportunity to toughen up. I don't say the Marine Corps did not make me the man that I am. The Marine Corps illuminated for me the man that I could be. And I will forever owe the Corps for that, and owe the Marines in the Corps for that. Obviously, good and bad aspects at various times, but there was a value to that, and serving with real live tough guys who I wanted to merit to stand in front of, I had to toughen up.
Yeah.
I mean, and I remember having my platoon commander at OCS telling me, he's like, you have got to toughen up. Simple as that. And then later when I was going through the infantry officer course, one of my instructors was like, you got to put on weight. Cause I weighed about 155, at 5'7", and he was like, your Marines are going to eat you alive. So I, started living in the gym and eating nothing but pasta and beef, and put on 20 or 25 pounds that now it's like, you've got to lose weight. So, I do say the Marine Corps is an incredibly effective machine for giving men eating disorders. But I worked through that.
Yeah. It's funny when I joined, I was thin, like same thing. I was like, I think I weighed 158 when I joined, and all I did was play like pickup games of basketball. Sometimes in some really rough areas in the city I grew up in, but that was it. And I ate probably like, I don't know, a cheese sandwich a day. I didn't eat a whole lot. And when I joined, The funny thing is, like right off the bat, I was down in Fort Benning in basic, and the drill sergeant's just dogging me out because I could sprint a little bit in basketball, but a 2 or 3 mile run was killing me because of my lung capacity. And I realized I grew up, everybody I knew, all the adults, eventually, a lot of the guys I grew up and hung out with in high school were smokers. So everybody's just burning down. I knew everybody basically by the brand of cigarette they smoked.
Gross.
I was just constantly like coughing and didn't realize I've got jacked up sinuses. I got sinus issues right now, but man, when I hit basic, they were just like, you have got to be the worst runner. You know, like I wasn't what they called a heavy drop or anything, guys that were, you know, overweight and they had to lose weight. And it took me like a month to, I don't know, kind of purge my lungs of that and eventually be able to run and get my PT score up. But I like what you said about, you know, the Marine Corps didn't make you the man you are. It just kind of honed it and guided it. It was the same thing for me. I joined the Army knowing what I wanted, but it was a shock to everybody else because I was so laid back. Now I got in a lot of fights growing up, but I never started them. Same thing, skateboarding, listening to punk and hardcore and people assuming stuff and not understanding. I was a kind of yes, sir, no, sir, yes, ma'am. Like I had manners and stuff.
Yeah, same.
Yeah, but it was like when I told my dad and others, you know, that I was going to join the Army and I wanted to be infantry, they were like, ooh, like you're just so nice and laid back. I was like, yeah, but there I can do what I want to do. And I can be as aggressive as I want to be, and it's fully rewarded. And I'm good with that. Like
you can explore a certain level of sociopathy.
Yes.
That works for young men, right? I mean, that's why the infantry is what it is, right? Is harnessing that. And you know, if we're putting it to the posters behind you,
yeah,
it's harnessing the energy that drives young men into a pit, right?
Yes.
You know, I mean, I've done the circle pit thing at 5'7" and 155 pounds. Didn't work out all that well, but I wanted to be a guy at that age who could. And as a friend of mine said years and years later about going into Marine Force Recon, he was like, I joined Marine Force Recon because I thought if I joined Force Recon, I would be more likely to kill someone. And if I killed someone, more women would want to sleep with me. Now, that betrays an abject misunderstanding of anyone's psychology, much less women's. But in the 21, 22-year-old mindset, it makes sense. You know, it's how you get guys good and bad into organizations for reasons malign and positive.
Yeah. So for you, when you joined, what was that path that you took? Because I know you got a very interesting background, but what was the path you took in the Marine Corps?
Yeah, nothing I've done has ever been conventional or normal. And so I as I said, I graduated high school in Athens, and my mom really felt like I ought to get out of Georgia for a couple years because we're dug in pretty tight down there. And I went off to the University of Colorado, and I was there for 4 years. Went to officer candidate school like every other ROTC nerd. Went to Australia for 6 months the day after I graduated officer candidate school up at Quantico, and had a life-changing 6 months there, just as far as how I looked at the world. Came home and had a semester left and commissioned. And so 5 days after I graduated college, I left Boulder, Colorado, and was in Quantico for the basic school. And it's there that Marine officers find out what their actual job is going to be. And it's based on performance in that 6-month school. Every Marine officer is trained to be a basic or provisional infantry platoon commander, but their performance in the school gets them a job. So I ended up taking a job, or asking for and getting selected as a ground intelligence officer, which was kind of a hybrid infantry intel thing that they were trying to do following the Gulf War, where Marine intel had kind of been a failure. So they're like, we got to train intelligence officers basically to be tough guy Marines too. So the first thing you're going to do is go out and either command a recon platoon or command a scout sniper platoon. And you're going to live in the infantry and toughen up a bit before you go get stuck in a skiff for the rest of your life. And I was all in. I was like, blow guns and throwing stars, and that sounds amazing. And so, I remember one of my instructors telling us, like, you ground intel guys don't think that you're going to be walking around with like a knife between your teeth and do-rag on your head. So my 6 weeks into the fleet, I mailed that guy a picture back of me with a knife in my mouth and a do-rag on my head. But anyway, that was awesome. And then, I had to do what all officers had to have to do, is do some staff time. And I felt like, I was being punished for something and I didn't know what I'd done, which it's just career progression, man. It's just how it works. But I was young and immature and probably a little selfish. And I call it Lieutenant Dan syndrome, where I had the idea of what my destiny was supposed to be. And the Marine Corps was not supposed to impact that. They were only supposed to facilitate it. And so I wanted to go to recon from snipers. And again, ignoring the fact that I was a 5'7", 155-pound lieutenant who couldn't swim very well. I wanted to go to a unit full of monsters who swim well and run fast and wear rucks. But I was having this kind of transition that I think a young man either makes or doesn't. And I was rereading something I wrote this morning. I wrote it years ago, but I was rereading it because my daughter is 14 and she's had a week this week where things just hadn't been going her way. And so I wrote this thing a few years back about how in Marine Recon, there's two communities, basically. There's bar fighters and there's swim team guys. And I'm sure it's true in the police force or wherever else, but a bar fighter is the guy, he's maybe doesn't look as good. He has to work a little harder. He's not as smart, but if you call officer needs assistance, he's going to be the first one there with, guns drawn and lights blaring. Yeah. Whereas a swim team guy kind of flashes through everything, but when it doesn't come easy, sometimes he's not as useful because he's so used to getting everything easy.
Yeah.
Yep. And special ops is full of both of those kind of guys as well. The selection process tries to weed them out. But anyway, I really want to go to recon. And so I ended up getting out to go to grad school and joined a reserve force recon unit. And by then had thankfully toughened up some and met a group of civilians who were just hardcore runners. Okay. I mean, real hardcore. And they were like good old boys and good old gals in Athens, Georgia. But I showed up as a newly released first lieutenant. And I was like, called the local running store. I was like, hey, where do hardcore runners meet? I want to train with them because I'm getting ready for this selection process. Like, okay, yeah, call this guy Robbie Burton. And he was actually he was a dispatcher on the University of Georgia Police Department. Okay. And I called Robbie and I was like, hey man, I want to come train with you. All right, buddy, come on and meet us out there. We made it to UGA track. All right, sounds good. So I show up probably wearing some absurd military outfit and we do the first run. We do 3 miles, which is the Marine Corps physical fitness test. And we do it at about my physical fitness test pace.
Okay.
And I'm like, all right, that was cool, guys. I'll see you next week for some more of that. And the guy's like, ain't you going to do the workout? So
yeah.
We do 12 by 400. And by about, my fourth lap, I'm literally on hands and knees vomiting on the side of the University of Georgia track. And there was this dude, had been a Marine in Vietnam, been blown up twice by landmines. His whole body's just scars. But I mean, he's chiseled. Okay. And he's like, hey buddy, you good? You gonna be all right? And I'm like, yeah, I'm good. So I get up and I finish the workout and I'm trying to mask this pain. And I'm like, okay, that was a good job, all you old people. I will be back next week for some training with you, and they're like, well, don't you want to cool down? So we go do another 5K at a little bit slower than my race pace. But those people stripped 3 minutes off my 5K time in about 6 weeks. And they taught me how to harden up. I got to give these civilians all this credit. But anyway, I ended up staying in that reserve unit through 2 years of work in carpentry and then 2 years as a pharmaceutical rep. And I'm just searching around for what I'm supposed to do in my 20s. And then 9/11 hits. And I was like, all right, I'm either joining the Bureau or the CIA or something. But I really wanted to go to grad school. And I tried to go to grad school once before, relying entirely on nepotism for entry. And that didn't work out. That's how I ended up doing carpentry and then drug sales. But I ended up at Florida State University College of Law. And I was in my second year, finishing up my second year, or I guess we were halfway through the second year when I found out, we were headed to Iraq that summer. And so I went to Iraq and by way of Camp Lejeune for a few months, and then Iraq, and then back, and then finished law school. And I was interning as prosecutor down in Tallahassee, prosecuting felonies. And I just realized this isn't for me. I thought I was the flaming sword of justice, but I'm really just locking up dudes who don't have a lot of opportunities in their life.
Yeah.
For being dumb. I mean, I remember trying a case one time where it was they were all crack cases.
Yeah.
And the defense attorney's claim, or whatever his assertion was, that these two dudes who were running from the police, who saw him doing hand-to-hand transactions, they fell down, and then they got up and kept running. And where they fell down, the officers found 2 like Mentos tubes of crack.
Right.
And the defense was, dude, in that part of town, there is crack everywhere.
Yes.
You don't know it's theirs. And it was from a legal perspective, a totally plausible argument.
Yes.
And I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. And so the Marine Corps was looking for guys to come back in, and my buddies from my Force Recon deployment to Iraq were starting the Marine Special Ops Command. So I went to my wife and I was like, I found you your dream job at the ACLU in Raleigh. Can I go do mine and be a Marine Special Operator? And she was like, all right, we'll make it work. So here we are,
So back to the prosecuting days. When you say that, did you ever hear the excuse, "These aren't my pants"? When someone's charged with like drug possession, legit. Like, I can remember being a rookie and searching guys, and then you find drugs, and they're just like, "Oh, yo, these aren't even my pants." And the first time I heard it, I was like, that does not make any sense. And I'll just hear over and over and over.
I never heard one that good. I mean, plenty of, how did you end up in the stolen car? This guy just pulled up and he was like, "Hey, here's some keys. Take this car." And I was like, "Yeah, all right."
Yeah.
Okay, man. I have a couple stock stories that I always think about during that time. And one was this cat, he was a reoffender, and he'd been released on parole, and he'd reoffended. So he's going back for the full bid. And Florida's tough. Like, Florida does not mess around. And so the judge is reading all the various Jimmy Rice, all the colloquies you got to go through during sentencing, and he's reading them all to him. And "Hey, I'm remanding you back to the Department of Corrections for the full thing of your term of 14 years. Or excuse me, you will not be released until 2014. This was 2006. So this guy's going back in for 8 years. And this guy's huge. And he just hulks up, like, enormous. And the bailiffs start leaning in.
Yeah.
And he's like, 2040. And the judge is like, "What?" And they say, 2040. And the judge is like, sir, 2014. And the guy goes, "Oh, 2014? I just didn't want to do no Buck Rogers time." And I was like, this guy, no worries whatsoever about being locked in a box for 8 years.
Yeah.
He just didn't want to be locked in a box for 34 years. That seemed a bit unjust. And I was like, the hopelessness behind that. And, and then years later, I was in DC, and I was working with a guy I had a mover move me into my house. And this dude is humping my home goods into my house fast as he can go. And DC is not, it's a literal swamp, not just the figurative swamp everybody talks about now. It's 1 billion degrees. It's July. This guy's just pouring sweat. And I bought, like you do, I bought some pizza and Cokes, and I'm like, "Hey man, what's your story?"
Yeah. And
he had done 15 years for armed robbery. And he wasn't proud. He was like, "Look, I'm embarrassed to tell you, but here's me. And now I'm just trying to, feed my kids with Church's Fried Chicken jobs and construction jobs and whatever I can do jobs. And it's just really hard. And I don't have a license. And so if I'm trying to do a construction job across town, I got to either drive while suspended, or I got to get on the metro and get there. And I'm 75th in line for a minimum wage day work."
Yeah.
And as a friend of mine said, that dude's doing a life sentence like 3 weeks at a time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things that, and like you're saying, when you encounter someone who's doing everything right to change their situation, their environment, and the guys I had like that, I would always just explain to them, right now it's just got to be day to day, man. You got to look day to day to get through it, but know that what is your long-term goal. And for a lot of those guys, because they're in day-to-day survival mode, they don't think that way. And coming out of prison, like one guy, and I'll have him on the show eventually, coming out of prison, he breaks it down the best way is that his internal, I don't know, dialogue, his own conversation with himself was always negative. And it was always based in, and this happened to be a black guy, it was based in, as he would say, ain't no cracker going to hire me.
Right.
And he said it took his girlfriend basically to rewire him and say, you have to have a different perspective. You can't walk into a job interview and assume a white guy who's whatever, 40 years old is racist and is not going to hire you because you've already defeated yourself. We used to have these great conversations. And of course, once he changed his thought process and started seeing people the way he wanted to be seen, like just, hey, look at me for who I am and how I act, his life changed. He eventually started his own business, had 5 employees. And that dude called me one time around the whole BLM movement and the riots were going on. And he called me and he's just like, man, we got to talk because I'm having a bad day and I'm not seeing a whole lot of good. And I don't like how police are treating people. And he was buying, full blown all of this basically propaganda being sent to him. And we talked for like 45 minutes. And it was almost like talking somebody off of a ledge, to have to like walk him through incrementally and remind him of his past and stuff. And to stuff like that you get, I hope a lot of other people, if they have conversations with people when they're doing work at their house or fast food or wherever, bus stop, whatever, and you start hearing about people and their day-to-day struggles, it's eye-opening. And I always get motivated by that when people are doing things right. And if there's anything I can do to help them or guide them, I do it. I try my best to.
There's a great outfit here where I live in Wilmington, and my wife is on the board of it. And it's called Leading into New Communities. And it's an outfit started by a guy named Frankie Roberts. And Frankie would honestly be an amazing, he's not a punk rock cop. Frankie Roberts is a African-American guy from the rough part of Wilmington. He was a barber. And his brother went to Vietnam and came home with a heroin addiction and went back, volunteered to go back to Vietnam so he'd get back to the source. So he's got this horrible, horrible heroin thing. And Frankie kind of swore off his brother, like, hey, man, I'm done with you. And his brother was really sick. He was in the hospital. Frankie was literally on the way to the hospital to tell him, 1, I forgive you, and 2, I apologize to you. And he died. Like, he got a phone call en route, like, your brother's dead. So that was 25 years ago. Okay. Frankie started this thing, Leading into New Communities, designed to take guys that are coming home, guys and gals, coming home from the joint, coming home from bad situations, et cetera. And they have to apply while they're in prison. So they come from all over the country.
Okay.
To come and stay at this facility in Wilmington where they train them up. Like, okay, you're going back into straight life, I guess you call it. And these folks, a lot of them have just never been exposed to any of this. So I go to their annual dinner every year because my wife's on the board where they really, stand all the folks up who have made massive changes in their lives. And it is amazing to watch. And I think we got to figure out a way to make that bigger in society because we're just wasting human capital. There's a guy that works at the landfill here in town, and he was featured one year, and like he was a 30-year bid in federal prison. Like he wasn't messing around back in the day. And I mean, I watched a little short documentary on him. I'm like, he's leaving some things unsaid, which is probably wise. And but he was like, when I got out of Link, I wanted to be the first guy, graduate of Link, to have a job with benefits. I wanted to get a county job with benefits. And that guy's running a shift out of the landfill now, and he's got benefits, and he's got a life, and he's proud. I mean, and it's awesome.
Yeah, and link me up with the person you were talking about, offline, because those are the type of people that years ago I will make connections with in the city I worked in. And it was always that, like, I want people to hear stories like that and to understand people can be either born into poverty or they can be, you know, 2-parent homes, you know, 6-figure salaries, and they still choose a life of crime where they still make horrible decisions or get addicted to drugs and it ruins their life. But then when they want to change and people offer that help and they can do it, to me, it's always like inspiring. And I love the fact that people still do it out of their own, like their heart, their self-motivation. They're not getting paid 6 figures to go out there and help people.
Oh no, they're struggling to help people.
Yeah. And that's the thing too, that I would love for people, you know, who maybe haven't lived in that environment to fully get what it's like when someone comes out of prison. And the longer someone's in prison, we know this, it's the more that total institution kind of forms and shapes their ability to survive on the outside. And I draw this comparison. And years ago, people get frustrated, especially when I got out of the Army and went to college. And I would look at getting out of the Army, because my discipline was psychology and then a minor in sociology. So there were all these arguments, you know, about crime and why people commit crime. And when we were studying, you know, total institutions and stuff, I'm thinking, the Army was the exact same way. You know, everything was provided for me by the Army, my meals, my housing, you know, sometimes like my haircut, you know what I mean? Like, so, yeah. And at certain points, I'm being told exactly what to do, when to do it. You know, it was that way in basic training. It was that way in the NCO Academy, you know, different schools and stuff. So it's this idea of when I'm getting out of the Army, the Army is now trying to teach me how to adapt to civilian life. And I'm 21 years old thinking, I don't really need that much help, do I? And then realizing, oh, okay, yeah, I do, you know, and it's one of those things of someone getting out of prison, very similar in that sense of now you got to survive. You got to figure out how you're going to pay your bills. Now, the difference was for me, I'd been working since I was like 13 and I had a clean record, and I now had 4 years of the military service that I could use as a selling point to get hired somewhere. I'm not trying to overcome a criminal record or the ability to make illegal money, which is what got me in prison, you know, or got that person in prison in the first place. That's what dudes used to say. They're like, man, when I get, you know, like they say, you know, I touch down when I get back home. If I can't make ends meet, I got, you know, a jackass over here on the side that can give me a coke connect, a heroin connect, and I'm right back up and running, selling drugs and making 3 to 4 times what I was making even before I went away. You know what I mean? So it was this.
Well,
like,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, and to me, that's an institutionalized hopelessness. And,
yeah.
And, you know, I used to be really pretty hardcore libertarian, and I'm just not anymore, because I'm not hardcore anything anymore because I've been too tempered by reality. And, you know, I just think back to, like I said, you know, a place in Tallahassee, Florida, where you can make a viable claim that, well, it could have just been crack laying on the ground. I don't know.
Yeah.
And people are like, yeah, okay, makes sense. And it is kind of makes sense. That institutional hopelessness, I don't presume or claim to know anything about what it's like coming home from prison, other than what I hear every year when I go to the link dinner.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, because I'm blessedly at a remove from all that. But I do read a lot. I do study a lot, and I'm interested in you know, externally, because I've just always been interested in resistance movements and insurgency and guerrilla warfare, etc. There's so many parallels between gang life in America.
Yeah.
You know, but that hopelessness is the problem for all of it. Like, I refer to my Iraq tour in 2004 and 5 as my ISIS recruiting tour.
Okay.
Yeah. And 10 years later, those guys came screaming out of the Western deserts and visited just, you know, medieval horror on the world. Well, I don't know that it's completely, you know, unrelated that 10 years before that, I was kicking down doors in Western Iraq, yanking dads and granddads out of their beds in front of their kids. Maybe some of them want to raise up. Maybe some of them got killed. Yeah. Regardless, I was, you know, I don't know this. I mean, what am I? I'm a 33-year-old law student. Hey, yeah, put him in a truck. He looks shady. Why does he look shady? Yeah. He just smells bad. He smells like soup. But I don't fail to understand why it would be plausible for a 20-year-old to feel like, hey, no, I'm going to get some. Right, wrong, or indifferent. So again, understanding the psychology pretty well of 18 to 35-year-old males.
Yeah.
I got like a dime store PhD in it at this point. I think understanding those people is not hard. It is reaching them is difficult. Have you watched? There's a documentary called Colga. Have you watched it?
No.
I recommend it to you. It's
Okay.
Columbus, Georgia. Colga. Colga.
Okay.
And it is about a summer, I want to say 21, 22. I don't know, it was COVID time frame. Columbus had, I think, 65 or 75 gang-related homicides.
Okay.
And they talked to all these gang kids who are all, I want out of the life and I'm going to be a rapper instead. None of them are rappers, just to go ahead and break the surprise. But it's just, again, the hopelessness of these kids are like, look, I don't expect to survive past 25.
Yeah.
What do you want? Or translate that out to some guy living in Eastern Syria in the middle of nowhere. I'm not allowed to have a girlfriend. I'm sexually repressed. I'm angry. I have no opportunity. And I have to have money to earn respect, to earn the right to ask for a woman's hand in marriage. And I got no hopes of that. Might as well blow myself up.
Yeah. There are such direct parallels that I have sat with some people, and basically they want to know, hey, how do you do what you do with gangs and all of it, flipping them into informants, the strategies, all of that stuff. And they wanted to know if they could replicate it somewhere else in the world. Do you know what I mean? So read between the lines there. But the cool thing is that it's all applicable. And the same thing when we study cycles and we look at, when I look at gangs and how my area, the city I lived in, how gangs got a foothold there and then spread and continue to spread. And then how do you do a threat assessment and say, okay, I'm going to sit in a room and give a briefing to, the local ASAC for the FBI, state investigator, the head of the state investigator agency, the district attorney, the sheriff, and the local city police chief. And when I explain gangs to them, sometimes their heads almost explode, because then they go, hold on, we didn't know gangs were this rampant, and that there's 22 separate sets of Bloods and there's 8 separate sets of Crips. And I'm breaking all this stuff down. But the great thing is, you don't have to worry about all of these different organizations right now. All you got to know is that what we're doing is prioritizing who are the most violent and who are caught in the inner conflicts. And that's who we're going to go after. That's who we're going to prioritize. And it's this exact same thing when what I'm hearing overseas as well. Just like you said, when a young man or young woman person, because gangs are, anybody can join now, and it's wide open. There are plenty of females that are putting bullets in bodies all over the South. So when you mention Georgia, and people, listening to this, then they think, oh, well, why they don't have like gangs in Georgia. I can tell you right now, a man was kidnapped from the state of North Carolina and taken to Atlanta, Georgia, and held there for 5 days by blood gang members. And the FBI's HRT blew the door off the hinges and rescued the guy. It's real. It's legit. The homicide count you talked about, that's directly gang related, it's like that all over. And it's the same running scenarios, or the same motives. It's driven by young people wanting money, being told that if they join this organization, they're going to get all of this support, and that they're going to now be accepted. And more importantly, they're going to be envied by their peers. And a lot of people miss that. We've got entire generations raised on just say no to the whole drug thing, and that peer pressure is just not that great. I can tell you the worst scenario for peer pressure is when 3 or 4 guys are in a car and one guy wants to join the gang, and the gang members are like, yeah, here you go. And they put pistol, shotgun, Draco, chop down, M4, whatever, in that person's lap, and then say, we're going to go put in work. And then now that person has to say, no, I don't feel like shooting anybody tonight. Like, that's real world all over the US. And it just starts that cycle. But the great thing about it is those cycles can be broken, and the violence can actually be decreased dramatically through a lot of proactive stuff if departments and agencies
And Columbus,
address it just like you were
Columbus
talking
did some of that. Columbus, I mean, per the documentary, Columbus went out and they found a new police officer, or new police chief rather, who had some, innovative ideas. What was interesting about them is that it's this cellular thing that they weren't Bloods and Crips. These gangs are Columbus gangs, and they're
Okay.
block by block by block. They don't have tentacles throughout the city. It's like, hey, you're on 13th Street now, but over here is 17th Street, and we're at war.
Yeah.
And of course, in my mind, I grew up off and on my grandmother's farm in Georgia, 600 acres. Like, I get land. I love land. I don't have any now other than, the house I'm sitting in, but I love land. I can't imagine being willing to die over a street you don't even own a piece of. But it speaks again to human psychology of I've got to align myself to something. And as a 14, 15, 16 years old, white suburban kid in Athens, I wanted to be in Public Enemy worse than anything.
Yes.
And all my friends and I called ourselves the 9-8 posse, and there was nothing less Chuck D than the 9-8 posse. But it didn't compute in our head. We came home every day and watched MTV Raps, and we thought the S1Ws were super cool. And one of my buddies wore a clock around his neck, and he meant it. It wasn't a joke.
Right. Yeah.
Guys that age want to desperately to align themselves with something. It's why armies work. It's also why why insurgencies work, and why gangs work, and why it's so damn cynical in how you waste the flower of our youth in bad pursuits.
Yeah. Two things. One, the Public Enemy reference is incredible because same thing. Like we loved Public Enemy, Boogie Down Productions, EPMD, all this stuff. But when it came to Public Enemy, that was like one of the first times. Like, I always read lyrics with punk and hardcore because they were running parallel at the time. But reading like Black Steel and the Hour of Chaos, I think is the song. And it's like, oh, here's a perspective of a guy who basically is getting drafted for the military, and he doesn't want to go fight in a foreign war. And why? Because his country hasn't treated him right. Now he's serving time. And I listened to that song. I don't know, man, I was young, like middle school. And I remember thinking, okay, now I can see this through a different person's perspective. And a lot of people were losing their minds when they would hear Public Enemy. And then, of course, people are like Professor Griff, anti-Semitism.
I think Professor Griff was an anti-Semite.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And so it's this idea that it was almost like fragmenting, and Chuck D's kind of saying, hey, and Flavor Flav saying, hey, we're not racist. We're not this way. We're bringing everybody together, which was true. Like, I mean, I've got a flyer somewhere that I'll put up here eventually that my brother went to see him play in the South. And there were, black and white kids just, enjoying themselves and listening to Public Enemy and opening their minds.
Mm-hmm.
Now, here's the crazy thing. I used to, stop dudes and talk to them throughout my district where I worked early on. And that was part of the rapport building was like, hey, what are you listening to? And like you had mentioned, everybody wants to get out of the gang world and become rappers. And there were dudes like that. And they had the motivation, but all the lyrics were the exact same. I remember sitting down with a kid who I actually liked him. The guys he hung out with were extremely violent. They were tied into multiple shootings, one homicide. But I could talk to him. And he was never like a signed up informant. We didn't work long-term investigation. It was just, basically chopping it up when we would see each other. And I'm sitting here talking to him about his lyrics. And I'm like, man, if you're serious about this, I want you to listen to these groups or these, MCs. Like, and I'm giving him a list, and Public Enemy was one of them. And I'm like, I'm telling you right now, go listen to this and understand if you change your message and you get away from the drug game and disrespecting women and, you know, throwing bees up and rapping about being blood, if you get away from that and you start actually talking about what it's like, what you see right here, you know, women that are addicted to drugs turning tricks right here on this one block, you know, the young kids catching stray bullets, what it's like day to day, like, do that, you might get somewhere. But everybody else across the country is all trying to talk about gang life, how hard they are, how they want to kill everybody. I'm like, it's played out, man. Like, you're his generation. I was like, y'all are listening to rap that was getting hijacked. I got to go back to the 80s, man, and early 90s when there were messages in the music that everybody was listening to across the U.S. And just like you said, you're in this, you know, suburbs down in Athens, Georgia, where everybody's listening to like early REM, you know, Driving and Crying, stuff like that. And it's like also Public Enemy. Like,
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, there was a rap show on WUOG 90.5, which is the University of Georgia station, and it was 1 hour a week. And I would sit there with my tape deck next to my stereo and record the show so I could listen back to, you know, Stetsasonic and
yeah.
who I can't remember who did Jam on It. I knew all the words to Jam on It. I
I
probably still
thought
could
at
do
first,
Jam on It.
Yeah. Planet Rock popped in my head, but that's another song.
No, it'll come back to me. But you know,
Yeah.
all those I can still rap a substantial number of Dr. Dre tunes. I can still do a lot of Public Enemy, both Chuck D and Flavor Parts.
Yeah.
Or excuse me, Flavor.
Yeah.
But that stuff does matter. I mean, I loved De La Soul at that age too. But I mean, why is again, you're into the whole aggression thing at that age, the metal, punk, whatever. I listened to it all.
Yeah.
You know, I saw Metallica 4 times in the late 80s, and you know, you feel every lyric. And I talk to my daughter about that kind of thing now, because of course she feels music as deeply now as I wish I did now.
Yeah.
And I just don't. I still love it, and I still go to live shows, but it's just not the same.
Yeah.
And I don't know where that goes, other than to say, again, especially young men, young women too, but young men are looking for something to throw their lot in with and to align them to, and something that says, yeah, I matter because.
Yes. Yeah.
And I was talking to a guy about this yesterday, and a term another guy I know uses is unfinished men. And I would say when I was, you know, seeking to become a recon guy way back in the day, I was an unfinished man. And I thought if I went through this process and went to these schools that gave me these badges behind me, that I would be a finished man, and everybody would respect me and they would see the badges and know that I'm a finished man. I don't know that any of that was necessary, because you're not a finished man until you figure out that you're a finished man and behave accordingly.
Yeah.
You know, but I think we've got a whole generation of unfinished men, and that sounded wrong. It's not generation, because I don't want to be a millennial or zennial or whatever basher. But we have generations with percentages of unfinished men who are looking for something to say that they do actually count, and they don't know how to find it, or that it's mostly inside themselves.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I don't, like, I look at every generation, and for every time, you know, and this goes on now currently, it's, you know, my parents did it to us. You know, my mom would call me an air conditioned baby, because she grew up with no air condition, outdoor, you know, an outhouse. And my grandfather, her father was an orphan. So, I mean, like, the guy bought the house from Sears and Roebuck, got shipped to him, and he
Those are
built
cool
a
houses.
house. It was a dirt floor. And the crazy thing was, it was in the same district that I eventually became a cop in, and I would ride by that house going to and from our substation. It's crazy. So I was like, how cool is that? And she,
cool.
Yeah, she would tell me, she's like, I can remember when this road was dirt when I was a kid, you know, and wearing, they called them gunny sack dresses.
Yeah.
But my grandfather would buy potatoes that came in a canvas bag, and then he would actually cut the bag and re-sew it so that she and my aunt could wear it as a dress. The crazy thing too about that same guy, he was involved in the Boy Scouts to the point where he was a scoutmaster. And at some time, and I forget the dates, my aunt has this check in a frame on her wall. And it's been in the family going back to Norman Rockwell's days of painting the Boy Scouts in different things. And I think this was a calendar back then. And my grandfather's troop they were doing like a river crossing, building basically like a rope bridge and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And Norman Rockwell painted them.
That's
and
cool.
Then paid my grandfather $50. And the cool, because I guess he was using his likeness, but my grandfather kept the check. He never cashed it. So there's a check for like $50 that
You still got it?
Yep, my aunt's got it framed on her wall. So it stayed in a safety deposit box with my grandparents. And then when I was in high school, I was in art class and learning about Norman Rockwell and stuff like that. And I came home and mentioned something about it. And I think it was like 9th grade or something. But my mom's like, oh, yeah. That guy painted your grandfather or something back in the Boy Scouts. So I was like, whoa, what? So it's pretty cool.
That is cool.
But that guy, this is the effect when you mentioned Boy Scouts earlier. That man has a park named after him. And I have encountered numerous men who were scouts under him. And every person I meet, whoever knew him really, but his Boy Scouts particularly, will stop. And a lot of times they'll look at me. They'll say his name again. You know, if it comes up in conversation, they say, you know, that man right there is the reason I fill in the blank. Like one guy was a state trooper and he had years of, you know, incredible service, was a really good example of being a state trooper. And he's like, your grandfather as a scoutmaster taught me how to be a man, how to treat people with kindness, how to be self-reliant. Like all these lessons, I'm going, man, that's incredible.
It's
like,
a tremendous
yeah.
organization. It gets pilloried sometimes unfairly. You know, everything has to grow, everything has to change. You know, General Eric Shinseki said, if you don't like change, you'll like irrelevance even less. And I believe that. Like I hold on to that. But I said my parents were divorced. I'm super tight with my dad. My dad was super involved, the whole nine. And I'm a Marine because of my dad. My scoutmaster was a special forces guy, and he took a lot of time with me. And the things he liked doing, which is what our Boy Scout troop did, were the things that I wanted to be doing. So it's like roaming around the woods and shooting guns and, hiking and rock climbing up at the ranger camp in Dahlonega and, doing stuff that really appealed to me. And so, and he would take me to, these Special Operations Association conventions or whatever for a day and introduce me to all these legends. And that inspired me to want to follow that path. And at that age, I still didn't know how to get there. It was like knowing I want to do a thing. And it was something I wrote. I was talking about that essay earlier today. Like there's people that want to talk about wanting to do something. And then there's people that want to put in the work to do it. And that's two very different people. And I saw it in a lot of, I never forget a kid I went to amphibious reconnaissance school with, and he'd been an admin clerk who fought to get to go to that school. Because his dad had been with 3rd Recon in Vietnam, and he's like, I just want to live up to my dad's thing. Cool. And I remember him saying to me one night, like, we only been there 2 or 3 days. He's like, sir, they're going to have to kill me to kick me out of here. I'll never leave. And this kid was jacked. I mean, just all muscle and tattoos. And on like day 3 of the course, he woke up, or I woke him up at 3 because that was my job. And we're all waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning. He sits up in the bed. He's like, I can't do this anymore. And he gets up and sprints out and quits. He wanted to talk about wanting to be recon. He wanted to tell his friends about training to be recon. He didn't want to be recon, right? Everybody wants to do gangster shit till it's time to be a gangster.
It's true.
And that was, I think, absolutely true. But again, I keep coming back to this drumbeat. Like we got to find a way to give some of these primarily young men something, hope.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think moving forward in the next few years, I don't know, 4 to 6 or 4 to 7, something like that, that we'll see kind of that resurgence in the military? I know there are articles that come out that say, hey, they're missing their recruiting, percentages. One of them said somewhere, I think it was for the Army specifically, like 25% deficit of their recruiting numbers. Do you think that's going to change moving forward with the you know?
I don't know. I don't know how all of this affects. There's such an interplay, right? There's economy, there's world events, there's presidential administrations. You know as well as I, like the military and its sourcing tends to be more conservative, more southern, more rural. That's just a reality. That's not a political statement. And so that might affect things. When the economy's doing well, there's less impetus to get out there. And then, we got everybody screaming about DEI right now. I'm of the mind that we need to be aggressively seeking the top of all Americans.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if that means I got to work a little harder to find the top 10% of some demographics to convince them that national service is to their benefit and is to the nation's benefit, I'm willing to do it. Because a strong national defense and a quality national defense matters to me. I don't think you can do that with the remainder of what's left as well as you can as aggressively seeking the best of everybody available. But I don't know the answer to your question as far as how that's going to go. I mean, I think this year everybody did make mission, as we call it in the Marine Corps. But the few years before that, for 2 or 3 or 4 years, it's been a big concern. And I remember I got a good friend who will remain nameless, but he's retired sergeant major, retired about the same time I did. And he's like the realest deal as a Marine goes. And he grew up rough in rural Virginia. And he calls me up one day and he's got this great accent. He's like, I want you to think about something. And anytime he says to me, what I'd like you to think about is, I know that's the thing I need to think about. Like, he ain't calling to make up some random stuff. And I'm like, all right, man, what do you want me to think about? Like, I know why I joined. I know why you joined. But I don't know why these kids today are joining, and we've got to figure it out. And he's right? Because what's the motivation? What do you get out of this? For me, I go back to, it's the same conversation we've been having, right? I wanted to join a gang. It's just the gang I wanted to join was the Marine Corps. Right? I didn't want to be, I want to be on the white hat wearing side, and I wanted the full validation of the might of the U.S. government, and I wanted ribbons and medals and badges, and I wanted people to think I was cool and honorable and good. Fortunately for me, that got channeled into a generally positive organization. People can debate how they feel about that, but I perceive it that way. As military service, and I think the nation largely validates that as a collective truth. But if all you know is, the 87th Street Bloods, and that's where the power comes from in your world, maybe that's the way that you go, or narco state, or whatever, ISIS, pick an organization. 18-year-olds are baby snakes.
Yeah, it's a good way to put it. I look at it as probably the best recruiters for the military are people who've already been in, and what's their opinion. And so I always speak positively. And then, people will say, oh, well, you were in decades ago. It's changed so much. Okay. But when I was in, I also had a sergeant major who had fought in Hamburger Hill. And that guy treated us like we were the softest, raggedy ass bunch of infantry. But he had been there. He had done these things, and he was seeing the Army at that time, in his words, was basically hollow. Like you all have not been tested. They were all trying to pass their knowledge down, but we had been over a decade away, or almost 2 decades, away from Vietnam. So I know that, like, every generation looks at it differently. I don't know what it's like to serve in the military now. I've been out for decades now, but I think its core value is still all the same. It's hard work. It's testing yourself. It's learning a skill. Like, for me, my recruiter was like, dude, you blew the ASFAB. Like, you scored so high. You got in, man. You got it. You made it into the infantry. I was like, yes, I'm a genius. I didn't understand. Like, I had just barely scored just high enough for him to get me in the infantry. So
cool.
I always joke with people. It's like, recruiters are going to sell you on whatever they think you want. That's cool. To me, recruiter was just, hey, you handle the paperwork. I know why I'm going in. I know what I
Right.
want to get out of it. I think that for people out there, don't crush somebody's dream if they're thinking about going in the service. Speak honestly about it. But if you had a good experience and overall it was good for you, tell them that. And they'll make their own decision. You know, it's not, you're not going to talk
Yeah, and it
somebody
has to
into
be. I
that.
mean,
Yeah.
as I said, my grandfather died young. He was only 40 when he passed, and he got shot 3 times at Sugarloaf Hill on Okinawa. And you know, one of the last things he told my grandmother was, "Don't let the boys join the Marine Corps." And then my dad, and I think he was very proud of his service, but he didn't talk a lot about it, and it just wasn't the mainstay of his whole life. And my old man was like, "You don't need to do this. Like, I already did this. I got you covered. No, I want to do it, you know." And I know he's very, very proud of you know, I stayed in, all told, 27 years between active and reserve years, but 22 active years. And um, I know he's very proud, but it would have been fine if he didn't. I don't need my daughter to serve, but
Yeah.
I won't stamp my foot if she wants to, but I don't think that's going to be her instinct anyway. But I do think, again, everybody needs something to validate them. I needed those civilian runners to tell me, man,
Yeah.
you have gone from being a 21:35K runner to a 19-minute 5K runner. That is awesome. You're in our club. Everybody
Yeah.
needs a club. Everybody needs a t-shirt to wear,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah. No, I agree 100%. Look, I appreciate your time today. The good news is we're going to do some future episodes because you're
Yeah,
definitely
anytime.
a talker, and I always want to know your opinion on stuff, dude. It's legit. So
Now this is a good time. I'd love to do that. I'd love to be if you got a regular, I'd love to be one.
yes, sir. And real quick, what is, because people are going to want to talk to you or you know, message and stuff. What's the best way people can get in touch with you, and anything that you're working on right now that you want to share or that you can tell people about?
Yeah, I got a host of articles I'm doing for magazines. I write a lot of stories about hunting and fishing, just because I like to go hunting and fishing, and if somebody will pay me for that, that's great. Pitching a couple books, right, or you know, working on a couple of book pitches, but nothing worth talking about right this minute. They can find me on Instagram in multiple ways, but where I think I'm most applicable to the crowd that we're talking about today is at Book War, which is B00KWAR. Talk about conflict books a lot. Certainly, you know, provide if somebody needs advice, I want to join the military or whatever, they can throw it out there. But mainly I talk about conflict issues and the books surrounding it, like that one, Always Faithful, that we did about the Kabul evacuation.
Perfect. Outstanding, buddy. Well, I appreciate your time, man.
All right, man.
All right,
Appreciate
buddy. Take
you.
care. All right, go ahead. There you go.